Introduction to The Ancient Geography of India. This comprehensive work examines the geographical knowledge and political divisions of ancient India as recorded by Greek historians, Chinese pilgrims, and indigenous sources. The author presents a detailed analysis of how the ancient Indians possessed remarkably accurate knowledge of their country's shape and size, as evidenced by accounts from Alexander's campaign, 326 BCE, the measurements of Greek geographers like Strabo and Eratosthenes, and the meticulous records of Chinese Buddhist pilgrims who travelled through the subcontinent between the 5th and 7th centuries CE. The text establishes that ancient India was understood as a vast territory bounded by the Indus River to the west, the Himalayan mountains to the north, and the sea to the east and south. Greek sources, particularly the accounts of Megasthenes, who visited the Mauryan capital of Palibothra, Patna, as an ambassador to Chandragupta, described India as a rhomboid or quadrilateral shape. The remarkable correspondence between these ancient measurements and modern geographical calculations demonstrates the sophistication of Indian geographical knowledge even in the pre-Christian era. The author then traces the evolution of India's political geography through various classical and indigenous frameworks. These include the traditional Hindu division into Navakanda, 9 divisions, described by astronomers like Varahamihira, the 5 Indies division adopted by Chinese pilgrims, and the detailed accounts of Xuanzang, who travelled through India in the 7th century CE. The work systematically examines each of these divisions, paying particular attention to the political boundaries, major cities, religious sites, and historical significance of regions across the subcontinent. A significant portion of the text focuses on northern India and the regions beyond the Indus, modern Afghanistan, which at various periods formed part of Indian political and cultural influence. The author traces the Buddhist and Hindu presence in these areas through numismatic evidence, inscriptions, and the accounts of Chinese pilgrims. From the kingdom of Capucine, around modern Kabul, to the districts of Gandhara and Taxila, the work reconstructs the political landscape of the northwestern frontier during the centuries immediately before and after the Christian era. The text also provides an exhaustive examination of the ancient kingdom of Kashmir, its ruling dynasties, and its major cities as documented by both indigenous chronicles like the Raja Tarangini and the observations of Chinese pilgrims. The author identifies and describes numerous important sites, including the old and new capitals of Srinagar, the cities founded by Indo-Scythian princes Kanishka, Pushkar, and Yushka, and the temple complexes built by later Hindu rulers. Through careful analysis of contradictory sources and archaeological evidence, the author reconstructs the locations of famous cities such as Taxila, one of the most important centres of learning and Buddhism in ancient India, and the legendary fortress of Aornos, which was captured by Alexander the Great after a difficult siege. This geographical reconstruction is supported by extensive archaeological observations, including descriptions of ruined stupas, monasteries, fortifications, and sculptures that the author personally examined in the field. Ultimately, the ancient geography of India serves as both a scholarly study of historical geography and a testament to the sophisticated understanding of their land possessed by ancient Indian peoples. By synthesizing Greek, Chinese, and indigenous sources with modern geographical knowledge and archaeological evidence, the work provides a comprehensive portrait of the Indian subcontinent's political, cultural, and religious landscape during the first millennium CE. And it is there also that we ought to look for Aornos, according to the almost unanimous opinion of all those who have studied the subject. The accounts of Alexander's historians are often vague and sometimes conflicting, but we are generally able to correct or explain the statements of one by those of the others. Where they agree, we can follow them with confidence, as it may be presumed that the original authors from whom they copied were not at variance. The last is fortunately the case with their accounts of Alexander's movements shortly before his approach to Aornos. According to Arrian, immediately after crossing the Gureus River, Alexander marched straight to Massaga, the capital of the Asakeni, and after its capture, he dispatched Koinos against Bazaria. Curtius calls the river Kois and makes Koinos proceed straight to Bazaria, whilst Alexander advanced against Massaga. Arrian then states that as Bazaria still held out, the king determined to march thither. But hearing that many Indian soldiers had thrown themselves into Aura, he changed his plan and moved against that city, which was captured at the first assault. According to Curtius, the siege of Aura was entrusted to Polysperchon, while the king himself took many small towns, whose inhabitants had sought refuge in Aornos. Arrian makes the people of Bazaria fly to Aornos for safety, but he agrees with Curtius in stating that the inhabitants of many of the neighbouring villages followed their example. From these accounts, it is evident that Aornos was beyond Bazaria, and from the subsequent narratives of Arrian and Curtius, it is equally clear that Embolima was beyond Aornos and on the Indus, where Ptolemy has placed it. Taking all these points into consideration, I believe that Bazaria, Aornos, and Embolima may be best identified with Bazar, Ranigat, and Ohind. Bazar is a large village situated on the bank of the Kalpan, or Kalipani River, and quite close to the town of Rustam, which is built on a very extensive old mound attributed to the time of the Kafirs or Hindus. According to tradition, this was the site of the original town of Bazar. The position is an important one as it stands just midway between the Swat and Indus rivers, and has, therefore, been from time immemorial the entrepot of trade between the rich valley of Swat and the large towns on the Indus and Kabul rivers. Indeed, its name of Bazar, or Mart, is sufficient to show that it has always been a place of consequence. This identification is much strengthened by the proximity of Mount Dantalok, which is most probably the same range of hills as the Montes Daedali of the Greeks. From all these concurring circumstances, I conclude that Bazar is almost certainly the same place as Alexander's Bazaria, and that Ohind was Embolima, as I have previously endeavoured to show. In proposing the ruined fortress of Rani Ghat as the most probable representative of the famous Aornos, I must confess that the identification is incomplete. In 1848, I estimated the perpendicular height of Ranigat as about 1,000 feet above the plain, and Mr. Lowenthal has since confirmed my estimate. But this height is so insignificant when compared with the 11 stadia, or 6,674 feet of Arrian, that I should hesitate to attempt identification, did I not believe that the height has been very much exaggerated. All the accounts of Aornos agree in describing it as a rocky hill of great height and steepness. Justin calls it saxum mira asperitatis et altitudines, an exceedingly rugged and lofty rock. Diodorus, Strabo, Arrian, Curtius, and Philostratus all call it Petra, or a rock fort. Its rocky ruggedness was, therefore, a special feature of Aornos. According to Arrian, it was only accessible by one difficult path, cut out by hand, and it possessed a fine spring of pure water on the very summit, besides wood and sufficient arable soil for the cultivation of 1,000 men. The last probable position that I know of is the ruined fortress of Ranigat. I visited this place in January 1848, and I had intended revisiting it during my tour in 1863. But the war on the Buna frontier most unfortunately prevented me from carrying out my intentions. Ranigat is situated on a lofty hill above the village of Nogram, which is just 12 miles to the southeast of Bazar and 16 miles to the north of Ohind. Its position, therefore, is strongly in favour of its identification with Aornos. The hill itself is the last point of one of the long spurs of the Mahaban range, Its base is rather more than 2 miles in length from north to south by about half a mile in width, but the top of the hill is not more than 1,200 feet in length by 800 feet in breadth. The sides of the hill are covered with massive blocks of stone, which make it exceedingly rugged and inaccessible. There is only one road, cut in the rock, leading to the top, although there are two, if not more, rather difficult pathways. This, we know, was also the case with Aornos, as Ptolemy succeeded in reaching the top by a rugged and dangerous path, whilst Alexander himself attacked the place by one regular path which was cut out by the hand. Ranigat may be described as consisting of a castle, 500 feet long by 400 feet broad, surrounded on all sides except the east, where it springs up from the low spur of Mahaban by a rocky ridge, which on the north side rises to an equal height. On all sides the castle rock is scarped, and on two sides it is separated from the surrounding ridge by deep ravines, that to the north being 100 feet deep, and that to the west from 50 to 150 feet. The entire circuit of this outer line is about 4,500 feet, or somewhat less than a mile. The castle itself is thus described by Mr. de Lowenthal. The summit of the hill offers a flat plateau of some size, which had been very strongly fortified by buildings all round the brow. These buildings are constructed of large blocks of stone, conglomerate found on the spot, neatly hewn and carefully fitted, disposed with very great regularity, and laid in a cement of extraordinary excellence. Unavoidable interstices between the large blocks are filled up by layers of thin small stone tablets, this latter practice being an invariable feature in all the so-called Kaffa buildings which I have seen in the Trans-Indus country. To this description, I may add that all the stone blocks are laid most carefully as headers and stretchers, that is alternately lengthwise and breadthwise, which gives a very pleasing and varied appearance to the massive walls. All the buildings are now much ruined, but the external walls are traceable nearly all round, and on the south and west sides are still standing to a considerable height, and in very good order. The main entrance, which is at the southwest corner, is formed in the usual ancient manner by overlapping stones. This central castle or citadel, with its open courtyard surrounded by costly buildings, I take to have been the palace of the king, with the usual temples for private worship. At the north end, I traced a wide flight of steps leading down to a second plateau, which I presume to have been the outer court of the palace or citadel. The upper courtyard is 270 feet long and 100 feet broad, and the lower courtyard, including the steps, is just half the size, or 130 feet by 100 feet. These open areas were covered with broken statues of all sizes and in all positions. Many of them were figures of Buddha the teacher, either seated or standing. Some were of Buddha the ascetic, sitting under the holy pipal tree, and a few represented Maya, the mother of Buddha, standing under the sal tree. But there were fragments of other figures which apparently were not connected with religion, such as a life-size male figure in chain armour, a naked body of a man with the Macedonian chlamys, or short cloak, thrown over the shoulders and fastened in front in the usual manner, and a human breast partly covered with the chlamys and adorned with a necklace of which the clasps are formed by two human-headed, winged and four-footed animals, something like centaurs. All these figures are carved in a soft, dark blue clay slate, which is easily worked with a knife. It is exceedingly brittle, and was therefore easily broken by the idol-hating Musalmans. But as the surface was capable of receiving a good polish, many of the fragments are still in very fine preservation. The best piece that I have seen was a head of Buddha, with the hair massed on the top of the head, and worked in a peculiar manner in wavy lines, instead of the usual formal curls. It was found at Jamal Gari, and is by far the best piece of Indian sculpture that I have seen. The calm repose of the finely chiselled features is not unworthy of Grecian art, but the striking beauty of the face is somewhat marred by the round, projecting Indian chin. I have already noticed that the Ranigat Hill is covered on all sides with massive blocks of stone, which make the approach very rugged and difficult. Numbers of these stones are of very large size, and some of those on the top of the hill have been hollowed out to form cells. Mr. Lowenthal notices this as one of the most marked features amongst these remains. Many of the cells are quite plain inside, whilst others have the simple ornament of a niche or two. The most notable of these excavated blocks is on the ridge to the south of the castle. It is called Catricor, or the grain merchant's house, by the people. But I observed nothing about the rock that would give any clue to its original purpose, save the smallness of the entrance, which was certainly better suited for the cell of a monk than for the shop of a dealer. Mr. Lowenthal notices that the vegetation on the hill is principally olive and myrtle, but in 1848 there was a considerable number of good-sized trees scattered over the summit. I do not insist upon the identification, but if we admit that the accounts of the historians are very much exaggerated, I think that the ruins of Ranigat tally much better with the vague descriptions of Aornos that have come down to us than any other position with which I am acquainted. In all essential points, save that of size, the agreement is wonderfully close. Its position between Bazar and Ohind, or Bazaria and Embolima, is quite unobjectionable. Its attribution to Rajavara renders it probable that the place may have been named after him, which would give a very near approach to the Aornos of the Greeks. Its great height, its ruggedness, and difficulty of access, its one path cut in the rock, its spring of water and level ground, and its deep ravines separating the outer works from the castle are so many close and striking points of resemblance that, were it not for the great difference in size, I should be very much disposed to accept the identification as complete. But though in this point it does not come up to the boastful descriptions of the Greeks, yet we must not forget the opinion of Strabo that the capture of Aornos was exaggerated by Alexander's flatterers. It must also be remembered that as the campaign against Ascanius took place during the winter, and the Macedonians entered Taxila at the beginning of spring, the siege of Aornos must have been carried on during the very depth of winter, when the Mahaban Hill, 7,471 feet above the sea, and every other hill of the same height, is usually covered with snow. It is almost certain, therefore, that even the lesser height of 11 stadia, or 6,674 feet above the Yusufzai plain, equivalent to 7,874 feet above the sea, must be grossly exaggerated. In this part of the country, the snow falls annually as low as 4,000 feet above the sea, or 2,800 above the Yusufzai plain, and, as no snow is said to have fallen on Aornos, although the Greeks mention that they saw snow during the winter, I think that their silence on this point is absolutely conclusive against the recorded height of Aornos, and therefore also against the claims of Mahaban, and of any other hill exceeding 4,000 feet in height. All the ancient authorities agree in describing Aornos as a petra, or rock, with rugged and precipitous sides, and with only a single path cut by hand. The Mahaban Hill does not, therefore, fulfill any one condition of the ancient description. It is a huge mountain of comparatively easy access, and is more than twice the size of the most exaggerated estimate of Alexander's flatterers. Its name also has no resemblance to Aornos, whilst the traditions of Rajavara, attached to Ranigat, would seem to connect that place directly with Aornos, Parashawara, or Peshawar. The great city now called Peshawar is first mentioned by Farhayan in AD 400 under the name of Folusha. It is next noticed by Sung Yun in AD 502, at which time the king of Gandhara was at war with the king of Kipin, or Kafene, that is, Kabul and Ghazni, and the surrounding districts. Sung Yun does not name the city, but he calls it the capital, and his description of its great stupa of King Kianisikya, or Kanishka, is quite sufficient to establish its identity. At the period of Huan Sang's visit, in AD 630, the royal family had become extinct, and the kingdom of Gandhara was a dependency of Kapisa or Kabul. But the capital, which Huan Sang calls Pulushapulo or Parashawara, was still a great city of 40 li, or 6 2/3 miles, in extent. It is next mentioned by Masudi and Abu Rihan in the 10th and 11th centuries under the name of Parashawar, and again by Baba in the 16th century. It is always called by the same name throughout his commentaries. Its present name we owe to Akbar, whose fondness for innovation led him to change the ancient Parashawar, of which he did not know the meaning, to Peshawar, or the frontier town. Abul Fazl gives both names. The great object of veneration at Parashawar in the first centuries of the Christian era was the begging pot of Buddha, which has already been noticed. Another famous site was the holy pipal tree at 8 or 9 li, or 1.5 mile, to the southeast of the city. The tree was about 100 feet in height, with wide spreading branches, which, according to the tradition, had formerly given shade to Sakya Buddha when he predicted the future appearance of the great king, Kanishka. The tree is not noticed by Fahian, but it is mentioned by Sungyun as the Phothi, or Bodhi tree, whose branches spread out on all sides, and whose foliage shuts out the sight of the sky. Beneath it, there were 4 seated statues of the 4 previous Buddhas. Sungyun further states that the tree was planted by Kanishka over the spot where he had buried a copper vase containing the pearl tissue lattice of the great stupa, which he was afraid might be abstracted from the tope after his death. This same tree would appear to have been seen by the Emperor Baba in AD 1505, who describes it as the stupendous tree of Begram, which he immediately rode out to see. It must then have been not less than 1500 years old, and as it is not mentioned in AD 1594 by Abul Fazl. In his account of the Gorkha tree at Peshawar, I conclude that it had previously disappeared through simple old age and decay. The enormous stupa of Kanishka, which stood close to the holy tree on its south side, is described by all the pilgrims. In AD 500, Fahian says that it was about 400 feet high and adorned with all manner of precious things, and that fame reported it as superior to all other topes in India. 100 years later, Sungyun declares that, amongst the topes of Western countries, this is the first. Lastly, in AD 630, Huan Sang describes it as upwards of 400 feet in height and 1.5 li, or just 1/4 of a mile in circumference. It contained a large quantity of the relics of Buddha. No remains of this great stupa now exist. To the west of the stupa there was an old monastery, also built by Kanishka, which had become celebrated amongst the Buddhists through the fame of Arya Parswika, Manarita, and Vasubandhu, 3 of the great leaders and teachers of Buddhism about the beginning of the Christian era. The towers and pavilions of the monastery were 2 stories in height, but the building was already much ruined at the time of Huan Sang's visit. It was, however, inhabited by a small number of monks who professed the lesser vehicle or exoteric doctrines of Buddhism. It was still flourishing as a place of Buddhist education in the 9th or 10th century, when Viradeva of Magadha was sent to the great Vihara of Kanishka, where the best of teachers were to be found, and which was famous for the quietism of its frequenters. I believe that this great monastery was still existing in the times of Baba and Akbar under the name of Gorkha tree, or the Baniya's house. The former says, "I had heard of the fame of Gurk Khatri, which is one of the holy places of the yogis of the Hindus, who come from great distances to cut off their hair and shave their beards at this Gurk Khatri." Abul Fazl's account is still more brief. Speaking of Peshawar, he says, "Here is a temple called Gorkha tree, a place of religious resort, particularly for yogis." According to Erskine, the grand caravansara of Peshawar was built on the site of the Gorkha tree. 7. Udyana, or Swat. On leaving Uttarakhand, Huan Tsang travelled about 600 li or 100 miles towards the north to Uchangna or Udyana, which was situated on the river Supavasutu, the Subhavastu and Swastu of Sanskrit, the Swastus of Aryan, and the Swat or Swat River of the present day. It is called Uchang by the earlier pilgrims Fahian and Sungyun, which is a close transcript of Ujjana, the Pali form of Udyana. The country is described as highly irrigated and very fertile. This agrees with all the native accounts, according to which Swat is second only to the far-famed valley of Kashmir. Huan Tsang makes it 5,000 li or 833 miles in circuit, which must be very near the truth, if, as was most probably the case, it included all the tributaries of the Swat River. Udyana would thus have embraced the 4 modern districts of Panchkura, Bijawar, Swat, and Bunia, which have a circuit of only 500 miles, if measured on the map direct, but of not less than 800 miles by road measurement. Fahian mentions Suhoto as a small district to the south of Udyana. This has generally been identified with the name of Swat, but from its position to the south of Udyana and to the north of Parashawar, it cannot have been the large valley of the Swat River itself, but must have been limited to the smaller valley of Bunia. This is confirmed by the legend told by Fahian of the hawk and pigeon, in which Buddha, to save the pigeon, tears his own flesh and offers it to the hawk. The very same legend is related by Huan Tsang, but he places the scene at the northwest foot of the Mahaban mountain, that is, in the actual valley of Bunia. He adds that Buddha was then a king, named Shipikya, or Sivika, which may perhaps be the true form of Fahian's Suhoto. The capital of Udyana was called Munkili, or Mangala, which is probably the Mangora of Wilford's surveyor, Mogul Beg, and the Manglora of General Court's map. It was 16 or 17 li, about 2 2/3 miles in circuit, and very populous. At 250 or 260 li, about 42 miles, to the northeast of the capital, the pilgrim reached the source of the Subhavastu River, in the fountain of the Naga king Apalala, and at 750 li, or 125 miles, further in the same direction, after crossing a mountain range and ascending the Indus, he arrived at Thalilo, or Darul, which had been the ancient capital of Udyana. Darul is a valley on the right or western bank of the Indus, now occupied by Dardas, or Dards, from whom it received its name. It is called Toli by Fahian, who makes a separate kingdom. The Dards are now usually divided into 3 separate tribes, according to the dialects which they speak. Those who use the Arnia dialect occupy the northwestern districts of Yasan and Chitral. Those who speak the Kajuna dialect occupy the northeast districts of Hunza and Naga, and those who speak the Sheena dialect occupy the valleys of Gilgit, Chilas, Darul, Koli, and Palas, along the banks of the Indus. In this district, there was a celebrated wooden statue of the future Buddha Maitreya, which is mentioned by both of the pilgrims. According to Fahian, it was erected 300 years after the nirvana of Buddha, or about BC 243, that is, in the reign of Asoka, when the Buddhist religion was actively disseminated over India by missionaries. Huan Tsang describes the statue as 100 feet in height and states that it was erected by Madhyantaka. The name and the date mutually support each other, as Madhyantaka, or Majjhima in Pali, was the name of the Buddhist teacher who, after the assembly of the Third Synod in Asoka's reign, was sent to spread the Buddhist faith in Kashmir and the whole Himavanta country. This is most probably the period alluded to by Huan Tsang, when Darul was the capital of Udyana. 8. Bolor, or Balti. From Darul, Huan Tsang travelled 500 li, or 83 miles, over a mountain range and up the valley of the Indus to Polulo, or Bolor. This district was 4,000 li, or 666 miles in circuit, its greatest length being from east to west. It was surrounded by snowy mountains and produced a large quantity of gold. This account of the route, compared with the bearing and distance, show that Polulo must be the modern Balti, or Little Tibet, which is undoubtedly correct, as the people of the neighbouring Dadu districts on the Indus know Balti only by the name of Palolo. Balti also is still famous for its gold washings. The name, too, is an old one, as Ptolemy calls the people Bultai or Biltai. Lastly, both in size and position, Balti corresponds exactly with the account of the Chinese pilgrim, as the length of the province is along the course of the Indus from east to west for 150 miles, and the breadth about 80 miles from the mountains of Deosse to the Karakoram range, or altogether 460 miles in circuit, as measured direct on the map, or about 600 miles by road measurement. 9. Phalana or Banu. The name of Phalana is mentioned only by Huan Tsang, who places the country to the southeast of Ghazni, and at 15 days' journey to the south of Lamkan. It was 4,000 li, or 666 miles in circuit, and was chiefly composed of mountains and forests. It was subject to Capucine, and the language of the people had a slight resemblance to that of central India. From the bearing and distance, there is no doubt that Banu was the district visited by Huan Tsang, from which it may be inferred that its original name was Varana or Bana. This is confirmed by Fahian, who calls the country by the shorter vernacular name of Pona or Bana, which he reached in 13 days from Nagarahara in going towards the south. Pona also is said to be 3 days' journey to the west of the Indus, which completes the proof of its identity with Banu, or the lower half of the valley of the Kuram River. In the time of Fahian, the kingdom of Banu was limited to this small tract, as he makes the upper part of the Kuram Valley a separate district called Loei or Ro. But in the time of Huan Tsang, when it had a circuit of more than 600 miles, its boundaries must have included the whole of the 2 large valleys of the Kuram and Gomal rivers, extending from the Safidko, or Little Snowy Mountains of Fahian, to Sivastan on the south, and from the frontiers of Ghazni and Kandahar on the west to the Indus on the east. I think it not improbable that the full name of this district, Phalana or Barana, may have some connection with that of the great division of the Gilji tribe named Buran, as the upper valleys of both the Kuram and Gomal rivers, between Ghazni and the Suleimani Mountains, are now occupied by the numerous clans of the Suleimani Kel, or eldest branch of the Burans. Iriab, the elder son of Buran and the father of Suleiman, is said to have given his name to the district of Haryub, or Iriab, which is the upper valley of the Kuram River. Siem Vivian de Saint Martin identifies Phalana with Vanne, or Vana, of Elphinstone. But Vana, or Wana, as the Afghans call it, is only a petty little tract with a small population, whereas Banu is one of the largest, richest, and most populous districts to the west of the Indus. Vana lies to the south-southeast, and Banu to the east-southeast of Ghazni, so that either of them will tally very well with the southeast direction noted by Huan Tsang. But Vana is from 20 to 25 days' journey to the south of Lamgan, while Banu is just 15 days' journey as noted by the pilgrim. As Fahian's notice of Banu dates as high as the beginning of the 5th century, I think that it may be identified with the Banagara of Ptolemy, which he places in the extreme north of Indo-Scythia, and to the south-southeast of Nagara, or Jalalabad. A second town in the same direction, which he names Andrapana, is probably Draband or Deraband, near Dera Ismail Khan. Huan Tsang mentions a district on the western frontier of Phalana, named Kikyangna, the position of which has not yet been fixed. Monsieur Vivian de Saint Martin and Sir H. Eliot have identified it with the Kaikanan, or Kikan, of the Arab historians of Sind. But unfortunately, the position of Kaikanan itself is still undetermined. It is, however, described as lying to the north or northeast of Kach Gandava, and as Kikyangna was to the west of Phalana or Banu, it appears probable that the district intended must be somewhere in the vicinity of Pishin and Quetta, and as Huan Tsang describes it, as situated in a valley under a high mountain, I am inclined to identify it with the valley of Pishin itself, which lies between the Khoja Amran hills on the north and the lofty Mount Takatu on the south. This position agrees with that of Kaikan, given by Biladuri, who says that it formed part of Sind in the direction of Khorasan. This is further confirmed by the statement that Kaikan was on the road from Multan to Kabul, as the usual route between these places lies over the Saki Sarwar Pass in the Suleimani Mountains and across the Pishin Valley to Kandahar. A shorter but more difficult route is by the valley of the Gomal River to Ghazni. But as the valley of the Gomal belonged to Falana, it follows that the district of Kikiangna must have been somewhere in the neighbourhood of Pishin, and as this valley is now inhabited by the tribe of Karkas, it is not improbable that the name of Kikan or Kaikan may have been derived from them. 10. Upokien, or Afghanistan. Upokien is mentioned only once by Huan Tsang in a brief paragraph, which places it between Falana and Ghazni, to the northwest of the former and to the southeast of the latter. From this description, it would appear to be the same as the Lowi of Fahian and the Ro of the Indian historians. Perhaps the name of Upokien may have some connection with Vorion or Verihun, which Wilford's surveyor, Mogul Beg, places near the source of the Tunchi or Toki branch of the Kuram River. In the map attached to Burns's travels by Arrowsmith, the name is written Borgoon. I am, however, inclined to identify Upokien or Avakan, as it is rendered by Monsieur Julien with the name of Afghan, as I find that the Chinese syllable Kien represents Gan in the word Ganta. From the cursory notice of the district by Huan Tsang, I infer that it must have formed part of the province of Falana. It was certainly a part of the mountainous district called Ro by Abul Fazl and Farishta, or southeastern Afghanistan, which would appear to have been one of the original seats of the Afghan people. Major Ravati describes Ro as the mountainous district of Afghanistan and part of Baluchistan, or the country between Ghazni and Kandahar and the Indus. The people of this province are called Rohilas, or Rohilla Afghans, to distinguish them from other Afghans, such as the Gori Afghans of Ghor, between Balkh and Merv. There is, however, a slight chronological difficulty about this identification, as the Afghans of Kilij, Ghor, and Kabul are stated by Farishta to have subdued the province of Roh so late as AH 63 or AD 682, that is about 30 years later than the period of Huan Tsang's visit. But I think that there are good grounds for doubting the accuracy of this statement, as Huan Tsang describes the language of Falana as having but little resemblance to that of central India. The inhabitants of Ro could not, therefore, have been Indians. If not Indians, they must almost certainly have been Afghans. Farishta begins his account by saying that the Mohammedan Afghans of the mountains invaded and laid waste the inhabited countries, such as Kerman, Shivaran, and Peshawar, and that several battles took place between the Indians and Afghans on a plain between Kerman and Peshawar. The Kerman here mentioned is not the great province of Kerman or Karmania on the shore of the Indian Ocean, but the Kerman or Kermash of Timur's historians, which is the valley of the Kuram River. The difficulty may be explained if we limit the part of Kerman that was invaded to the lower valley or plains of the Kuram River, and extend the limits of the Afghan country beyond Ghazni and Kabul, so as to embrace the upper valley or mountain region of the Kuram River. Politically, the ruler of Peshawar has always been the ruler of Kohat and Banu, and the ruler of Kabul has been the lord of the upper Kuram Valley. This latter district is now called Khost, but it is the Iryab of Timur's historians and of Wilford's surveyor, Mogul Beg, and the Haryab of Elphinstone. Now the Suleiman Kel of the Buran division of the Gilgis number about 3/4 of the whole horde. I infer, therefore, that the original seat of the Gilgis must have included the upper valleys of the Kuram and Gomal rivers on the east, with Ghazni and Kalati Gilji on the west. Haryab would thus have formed part of the Afghan district of Kiliji, or Gilji, from which the southern territories of Peshawar were easily accessible. But whether this explanation of Farishta's statement be correct or not, I feel almost certain that Huan Tsang's Opokien must be intended for Afghan. Its exact equivalent would be Avagan, which is the nearest transcript of Afghan that the Chinese syllables are capable of making. If this rendering is correct, it is the earliest mention of the Afghans that I am aware of under that name. 2. Kingdom of Kashmir. In the 7th century, according to the Chinese pilgrim, the Kingdom of Kashmir comprised not only the Valley of Kashmir itself, but also the whole of the hilly country between the Indus and the Chenab to the foot of the Salt Range in the south. The different states visited by Huan Tsang were Urasa to the west of Kashmir, Taxila and Sinapura to the southwest, and Punach and Rajgori to the south. The other hill states to the east and southeast are not mentioned, but there is good reason for believing that they also were tributary, and that the dominions of Kashmir in the 7th century extended from the Indus to the Ravi. The petty independent state of Kulu, in the upper valley of the Bias River, was saved by its remoteness and inaccessibility, and the rich state of Jalandhar, on the low Bias, was then subject to Harshavardhana, the great king of Kanoi. But towards the end of the 9th century, the Kangra valley was conquered by Sankara Varma, and the sovereign power of Kashmir was extended over the whole of the Alpine Punjab from the Indus to the Satluj. Huan Tsang describes Kashmir as surrounded on all sides by lofty mountains, which is a correct description of the valley itself. But when he goes on to say that its circuit is 7,000 li, or 1,166 miles, he must refer to the extended Kingdom of Kashmir, and not to the valley, which is only 300 miles in circuit. But the extent of its political boundary, from the Indus on the north to the Salt Range on the south, and from the Indus on the west to the Ravi on the east, cannot be estimated at less than 900 miles, and may very probably have reached the amount stated by the pilgrim. 1. Kashmir. Huan Tsang entered the valley of Kashmir from the west in September, AD 631. At the entrance there was a stone gate where he was met by the younger brother of the king's mother, and after paying his devotions at the sacred monuments, he went to lodge for the night in the monastery of Husikyalo, or Ushkara. This place is mentioned by Abu Rihan, who makes Ushkara the same as Baramulla, which occupied both sides of the river. In the Raja Tarangani, also Ushkapura is said to be near Baraha, or Varahamula, which is the Sanskrit form of Baramulla. Ushkara, or Uskar, still exists as a village on the left, or eastern bank of the Bahat, 2 miles to the southeast of Baramulla. The Kashmiri Brahmins say that this is the Hushkapura of the Raja Tarangini, which was founded by the Turushka king Hushka, about the beginning of the Christian era. According to the chronology of the Raja Tarangini, the king of Kashmir in AD 631 was Pratapaditya, but the mention of his maternal uncle shows that there must be some error in the native history, as that king's father came to the throne in right of his wife, who had no brother. Pratapaditya's accession must, therefore, have taken place after Huan Tsang's departure from Kashmir in AD 633, which makes an error of 3 years in the received chronology. But a much greater difference is shown in the reigns of his sons, Chandrapida and Muktapida, who applied to the Chinese emperor for aid against the Arabs. The date of the first application is AD 713, while according to the native chronology, Chandrapida reigned from AD 680 to 688, which shows an error of not less than 25 years. But as the Chinese annals also record that about AD 720 the emperor granted the title of king to Chandrapida, he must have been living as late as the previous year, AD 719, which makes the error in the Kashmirian chronology amount to exactly 31 years. By applying this correction to the dates of his predecessors, the reign of his grandfather Durlaba will extend from AD 625 to 661. He therefore must have been the king who was reigning at the time of Wen Tsang's arrival in Kashmir in AD 631. Durlabha, who was the son-in-law of his predecessor, is said to have been the son of a Naga or dragon, and the dynasty which he founded is called the Naga or Karkata dynasty. By this appellation, I understand that his family was given to ophiolatry or serpent worship, which had been the prevailing religion of Kashmir from time immemorial. Huen Tsang designates this race as Kilito, which Professor Lassen and Monsieur Stanislas Julien render by Kritia and Kritia. They were extremely hostile to the Buddhists, who had frequently deprived them of power and abolished their rights. On which account, says the pilgrim, the king, who was then reigning, had but little faith in Buddha and cared only for heretics and temples of the Brahmanical gods. This statement is confirmed by the native chronicle, which records that the queen, Anangaleka, built a vihara, or Buddhist monastery, named after herself, Anangapavana, while the king built a temple to Vishnu, called after himself, Durlabha Swamina. I infer from this that the queen still adhered to the Buddhist faith of her family, and that the king was, in reality, a Brahmanist, although he may have professed a lukewarm attachment to Buddhism. The people of Kashmir are described as good-looking, easy and fickle in manner, effeminate and cowardly in disposition, and naturally prone to artifice and deceit. This character they still bear, and to it I may add that they are the dirtiest and most immoral race in India. Wen Tsang states that the neighbouring kings held the base Kashmiris in such scorn that they refused all alliance with them, and gave them the name of Kilito or Krityas, which would appear to be a term of contempt applied to evil-minded and mischievous persons, as enemies, traitors, assassins, etc. The term which I have heard used is Kirmlekas, or the barbarian Kiras, and Wilson gives Kira as a name of the Valley of Kashmir, and Kira as the name of the people. In the 7th century, the capital of the country was on the eastern bank of the river, and about 10 li, or less than 2 miles, to the northwest of the ancient capital. Abu Rihan calls the capital Adishtan, which is the Sanskrit Adisthana, or chief town. This is the present city of Srinagar, which was built by Raja Pravarasana about the beginning of the 6th century, and was, therefore, a new place at the time of Huen Tsang's visit. The old capital I have already identified with an old site, 2 miles to the southeast of the Takhti Suleiman, called Pandrathan, which is the corrupt Kashmirian form of Puranadisthana, or the old chief city. Pan is the usual Kashmiri term for old, as in Pandras, or Old Dras, to distinguish it from the new village of Dras, which is lower down the river. Near the old capital there was a famous stupa, which in AD 631 enshrined a tooth of Buddha. But before Huen Tsang's return to the Punjab in AD 643, the sacred tooth had been given up by the Raja to Harshavardhana, the powerful king of Kanoi, who made his demand at the head of an army on the frontier of Kashmir. As Raja Durlabha was a Brahmanist, the sacrifice of the Buddhist tooth was a real gain to his religion. From the earliest times, Kashmir has been divided into the 2 large districts of Kamraj and Miraj, the former being the northern half of the valley, below the junction of the Sindh River with the Bahat, and the latter the southern half above that junction. The smaller divisions it is unnecessary to mention, but I may note the curious anomaly which a change of religious belief has produced in the use of 2 of the most distinctive Hindu terms. By the Hindu who worships the sun, the cardinal points are named with reference to the east, as para, the front, or the east, to which he turns in his daily morning worship. Apara, behind, or the west. Vama, the left hand, or the north. And Dakshina, the right hand, or the south. By the Mohammedan, who turns his face to the west, towards Mecca, these terms are exactly reversed, and Dachin, which still means the right hand in Kashmiri, is now used to denote the north, and Kawa, or the left hand, to denote the south. Thus, on the Lidar River there is the subdivision of Dachinpara to the north of the stream and Kawarpara to the south of it. On the Behat River also, below Baramulla, the subdivision of Dachin lies to the north and that of Kawar to the south of the stream. This change in the meaning of Dachin from south to north must have taken place before the time of Akbar, as Abul Fazl describes Dachinpara as situated at the foot of a mountain on the side of Great Tibet, that is to the north of the river Lidar. The principal ancient cities of Kashmir are the old capital of Srinagar, the new capital called Pravarasenapura, Kagendrapura and Kunamusha, built before the time of Asoka, Vijayapura and Pantasok, which are referred to Asoka himself, Surapura, a restoration of the ancient Kambuva, Kanishkapura, Pushkapura and Jushkapura, named after the three Indo-Scythian princes by whom they were founded, Parihasapura, built by Lalitaditya, Padmapura, named after Padma, the minister of Raja Vrihaspati, and Avantipura, named after Raja Avantivarma. Srinagar, the old capital of Kashmir prior to the erection of Pravarasenapura, is stated to have been founded by the great Asoka, who reigned from BC 263 to 226. It stood on the site of the present Pandrathan, and is said to have extended along the bank of the river from the foot of the Takhti Suleiman to Pantasok, a distance of more than 3 miles. The oldest temple in Kashmir, on the top of the Takhti Suleiman, is identified by the unanimous consent of all the Brahmins of the valley with the temple of Jeshtarudra, which was built by Jaloka, the son of Asoka, in Srinagar. This identification is based on the fact that the hill was originally called Jeshteswara. The old bridge abutments at the village of Pantasok are also attributed to Asoka, and the other ruins at the same place are said to be the remains of the 2 Asokeswara temples which are noted in the native chronicle of Kashmir. Srinagar was still capital of the valley in the reign of Pravarasena I, towards the end of the 5th century, when the king erected a famous symbol of the god Siva, named after himself, Pravaraswara. This city still existed in AD 631, when the Chinese pilgrim arrived in Kashmir, although it was no longer the capital of the valley. He speaks of the capital of his time as the New City, and states that the old city was situated to the southeast of it, at a distance of 10 li, or nearly 2 miles, and to the south of a high mountain. This account describes the relative positions of Pandrathan and the present capital, with the lofty hill of Takhti Suleiman so exactly that there can be no hesitation in accepting them as the representatives of the ancient places. The old city was still inhabited between AD 913 and 921, when Meru, the minister of Raja Partha, erected in Puranadisthana, that is, in the old capital, a temple named after himself, Meru Vardhanaswami. This building I have identified with the existing temple of Pandrathan, as Kalhan Pandit relates that, when Raja Abhimanyu set fire to his capital, all the noble buildings from the temple of Vardhanaswami as far as Bhikshukiparaka, or the asylum of mendicants, were destroyed. I attribute the escape of the limestone temple to its fortunate situation in the midst of a tank of water. To this catastrophe, I would assign the final desertion of the old capital, as the humble dwellings of the people could not possibly have escaped the destructive fire which consumed all the noble edifices of the city. Pravarasenapura, or the new capital, was built by Raja Pravarasena II in the beginning of the 6th century. Its site, as already noted, was that of the present capital of Srinagar. This is determined beyond all possibility of doubt by the very clear and distinct data furnished by the Chinese pilgrim Huenzang and by the Hindu historian Kalhan Pandit. The statements of the first have already been quoted in my account of the old capital, but I may add that Huenzang resided for 2 whole years in Kashmir, in the Jayendra Vihara, or Buddhist monastery, built by Jayendra, the maternal uncle of Pravarasena. The Hindu author describes the city as situated at the confluence of 2 rivers, and with a hill in the midst of it. This is an exact description of the present Srinagar, in the midst of which stands the hill of Hari Parbat, and through which flows the river Hara, or Ara, to join the Behat at the northern end of the city. The question now arises, how did the new city of Pravarasenapura lose its own name, and assume that of the old city of Srinagari? I think that this difficulty may perhaps be explained by the simple fact that the two cities were actually contiguous, and, as they existed together side by side for upwards of 5 centuries, the old name, as in the case of Delhi, would naturally have remained in common use with the people, in preference to the new name as the customary designation of the capital. The old name of Delhi is exactly a case in point. There, new city after new city was built by successive kings, each with the distinctive name of its founder. But as they were all in the immediate vicinity of Delhi itself, the old familiar names still clung to the capital, and each new appellation eventually became absorbed in the one general name of Delhi. In the same way, I believe that the old familiar name of Srinagar eventually swamped the name of the new city of Pravarasenapura. The names of Kajipura and Kunamusha are referred by Kalhan Pandit to Raja Khagendra, who, as the 6th predecessor of Asoka, must have reigned about 400 BC. Wilson and Troyer have identified these two places with the Kakapur and Galmoha of Mohammedan writers. The first is certain, as Kakapur still exists on the left bank of the Behat at 10 miles to the south of the Takhti Suleiman and 5 miles to the south of Pampur. But the identification of Galmoha, wherever that may be, is undoubtedly wrong, as Kunamusha is now represented by the large village of Kunamol, which is situated under the hills at 4 miles to the northeast of Pampur. The old town of Bijbitara, or Vijaypara, is situated on both banks of the Behat, at 25 miles to the southeast of the capital. The original name was Vijayapara, so called after the ancient temple Vijayesa, which still exists, although its floor is 14 feet below the present level of the surrounding ground. This difference of level shows the accumulation of ruins since the date of its foundation. The people refer its erection to Asoka, BC 250, who is stated by Kalhan Pandit to have pulled down the old brick temple of Vijayesha, and to have rebuilt it of stone. This is apparently the same temple that is mentioned in the reign of Arya Raja, some centuries after Christ. Surapura, the modern Supa or Sopur, is situated on both banks of the Behat, immediately to the west of the Great Wula Lake. It was originally called Kambhava, and under this name it is mentioned in the chronicles of Kashmir as early as the beginning of the 5th century. It was rebuilt by Sura, the minister of Avantivarma, between AD 854 and 883, after whom it was called Surapura. From its favourable position at the outlet of the Wula Lake, I think it probable that it is one of the oldest places in Kashmir. Kanishkapura was built by the Indo-Scythian prince Kanishka, just before the beginning of the Christian era. In the spoken dialects of India, it is called Kaniklipur, which in Kashmir has been still further corrupted to Kanpur. It is situated 10 miles to the south of Srinagar, on the high road leading to the Pir Panchal Pass. It is a small village with a sarai for travellers, and is now generally known as Kanpur Sarai. In the large map of Kashmir by Captain Montgomery, the name is erroneously given as Kanpur. Hushkapura, which was founded by the Indo-Scythian prince Hushka, or Huvishka, the brother of Kanishka, would appear to have been the same place as the well-known Varahamula, or Baralmula, on the Behat. Abu Rihan calls it Ushkar, which is the town of Baralmula, built on both banks of the river. It is noted under the same name by the Chinese pilgrim Wen Tsang, who entered the valley from the west by a stone gate and halted at the monastery of Husikialo, or Ushkara. The name of Baralmula has now eclipsed the more ancient appellation, which, however, still exists in the village of Uskara, 2 miles to the southeast of the present town and immediately under the hills. The place has been visited, at my request, by the Reverend G. W. Cowie, who found there a Buddhist stupa still intact. This is probably the same monument that is recorded to have been erected by Raja Lalitaditya between AD 723 and 760. It is again mentioned in the native chronicle as the residence of the Queen Sikander in AD 913. From all these notices, it is certain that the town still bore its original name down to the beginning of the 11th century, when Abu Rihan mentions both names. But after this time, the name of Varahamula alone is found in the native chronicles, in which it is mentioned during the reigns of Harsha and Susala, early in the 12th century. I think it probable that the main portion of the town of Hushkapura was on the left or south bank of the river, and that Varahamula was originally a small suburb on the right bank. On the decline of Buddhism, when the monastic establishment at Hushkapura was abandoned, the old town also must have been partially deserted, and most probably it continued to decrease until it was supplanted by the Brahmanical suburb of Varahamula. Yushkapura was founded by the Indo-Scythian prince Yushka, a brother of Kanishka and Hushka. The Brahmins of Kashmir identify the place with Zukru, or Zukur, which is still a considerable village, 4 miles to the north of the capital. This is evidently the Shekro, ville assez considerable, which Troyer and Wilson have identified with Hushkapura. I visited the place in November 1847, but the only traces of antiquity that I could discover were a considerable number of stone pillars and mouldings of the style of architecture peculiar to Kashmir, all of which had been trimmed and adapted to Mohammedan tombs and masjids. Parihasapura was built by the great Raja Lalitaditya, who reigned from AD 723 to 760. It was situated on the right or eastern bank of the Bahat, near the present village of Sumbal. There are still many traces of walls and broken stones on the neighbouring mounds, which show that a city must once have existed on this spot. But the only considerable remains are a bridge which spans the Bahat, and a canal which leads direct towards Supa, to avoid the tedious passage by the river through the Wula Lake. As Parihasapura is not mentioned again in the native chronicle, it must have been neglected very soon after its founder's death. His own grandson, Jayapida, built a new capital named Jayapura, in the midst of a lake, with a citadel which he named Sridvaravati, but which the people always called the Inner Fort. The position of this place is not known, but I believe that it stood on the left bank of the Behat, immediately opposite Parihasapura, where a village named Antarkot, or the Inner Fort, exists to this day. The final destruction of this city is attributed by the people to Sankaravarma, who reigned from AD 883 to 901. He is said to have removed the stones to his own new city of Sankarapura, which still exists as Patan, 7 miles to the southwest of the Sumbal Bridge. The great temple at Parihasa was destroyed by the bigoted Sikander, who reigned from 1389 to 1413 AD. Of this temple, a curious story is told by the Mohammedan historians. Speaking of Parispur, Abul Fazl says, "Here stood a lofty idolatrous temple which was destroyed by Sikander. In the ruins was found a plate of copper with an inscription in the Indian language purporting that after the expiration of 1,100 years, the temple would be destroyed by a person named Sikander." The same story is told by Farishta, with the addition of the name of the Raja, whom the translator calls Balnat, which is probably a mistake for Laldit, the usual contracted form of Lalitaditya among the Kashmiris. As the difference of time between this prince and Sikander is barely 700 years, it is strange that the tradition should preserve a date which is so much at variance with the chronology of their own native chronicles. Padmapura, now called Pampur, was founded by Padma, the minister of Raja Vrihaspati, who reigned from AD 832 to 844. It is situated on the right bank of the Bahat, 8 miles to the southeast of the capital, and about midway on the road to Avantipura. The place is still well inhabited, and its fields of saffron are the most productive in the whole valley. Avantipura was founded by Raja Avantivarma, who reigned from AD 854 to 883. It is situated on the right bank of the Behat, 17 miles to the southeast of the present capital. There is now only a small village called Wantipur, but the remains of two magnificent temples and the traces of walls on all sides show that it must have been once an extensive city. The name of Nonagar, or the New Town, which is now attached to the high tract of alluvial tableland on the opposite side of the river, is universally allowed by the people to refer to Avantipura itself, which is said to have occupied both banks of the river originally. 2. Urasa. Between Taxila and Kashmir, Huensang places the district of Ulashi or Urasa, which, from its position, may at once be identified with the Vasa Regio of Ptolemy and with the modern district of Rash in Dantawar to the west of Muzaffarabad. It is mentioned in the native chronicle of Kashmir as a mountainous district in the vicinity of the valley, where Raja Sangharavarma received his death wound in AD 901. It corresponds exactly with the Pakali of Abul Fazl, which included all the hilly country between the Indus and Kashmir, as far south as the boundary of attack. At the present day, the principal towns of the district are Mansehra in the northeast, Naushahra in the middle, and Kishanga or Haripur in the southwest. In Huensang's time, the capital is said to have been either 300 or 500 li, that is, 50 or 83 miles, distant from Taxila. This difference in the distance makes it impossible to identify the actual position of the capital in the 7th century. But it seems probable that it must have been at Mangali, which is said by the people to have been the ancient capital of the district. This place stands midway between Naushahra and Mansehra, and about 50 miles to the northeast of Taxila. According to Huensang, Urasa was 2,000 li, or 333 miles, in circuit, which is probably correct, as its length from the source of the Kunihar River to the Gandhar mountain is not less than 100 miles, and its breadth from the Indus to the Behat or Yilam is 55 miles in its narrowest part. Its distance from Kashmir is stated at 1,000 li, or 167 miles, which would place the capital somewhere in the neighbourhood of Naushahra and within a few miles of Mangala, which was the ancient capital according to the traditions of the people. 3. Taxila or Takshashila. The position of the celebrated city of Taxila has hitherto remained unknown, partly owing to the erroneous distance recorded by Pliny, and partly to the want of information regarding the vast ruins which still exist in the vicinity of Sharderi. All the copies of Pliny agree in stating that Taxila was only 60 Roman, or 55 English, miles from Pakalitis or Hashnagar, which would fix its site somewhere on the Haro River, to the west of Hassan Abdal.